Hi guys, this is Rosa Kelly. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to talk about all the books that I read on the month of February. I have quite a pile, so let's take a look. So hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for being here. Today I'm super excited to share with you the books that I read. I was able to keep pretty close to my TBR and I read a bunch of books that I had planned to read, and I'm excited for that. But also I started a couple new books that I was just too excited to wait, and yeah, so I'm halfway through a bunch of books again. But let's talk about the books that I did finish. So before I talk about the books that I read, I do want to let you know that I'm going to be announcing a winner for a book on this video. On my February TBR, I announced that I had a couple books that I have on repeat, so I'm going to pick a winner from the comments on that video, and also make sure you comment on this video as well, because I will be selecting a second winner. So the winner for this video is going to take the Postmistress of Paris, which is a historical fiction novel. I do have two of these books, so I'm going to just give one out and I will announce the winner at the end of this video. For the second book on the giveaway, it's going to be A Flicker in the Dark, which is one that I was super excited about, and apparently I bought 2 copies, so this is gonna be a second giveaway. So leave a comment on this video if you want to be part of this giveaway also, and it's gonna be US only, just because I don't know how much will be to ship this book. So now let's get into my wrap-up. First book that I finished is Sarah's Key, and this is by Tatiana de Rosnay, and so this is a historical fiction book which I love to read. It's so dear to my heart because I can never have enough of the different stories about survival, not just World War II, but in general. I just really find a connection to history through stories, and instead of reading a history book, I like to discover actual people's experience. So this book is based on a real life story of a girl who survived the Holocaust, but she wanted to protect her little brother, and so they had this hiding place on their apartment, and they live in France. So when the police came to look for them to be, sent to the German, she put her little brother on this hiding place that they always play hide and seek, and she kept the key, hoping she was going to return, or her father was going to return and, get the little brother. However, that didn't happen, and she was sent to a concentration camp, and she had her key the whole time with her, and she always had this hope of knowing, like what happened to her brother. Wanted to escape, and she wanted to just find out what happened. So on this story, you're actually following the narrator, who is this lady who now is moving to this apartment, and she's also a journalist, so she's trying to find out the history of, some of the children that were disappearing on the times of World War II and where they ended up going. And then when she found out what had happened on the apartment that she was moving to, she was really interested on learning the history, and she actually committed to find this lady, Sarah, who now was living on the US, and it's just such a beautiful story. And of course it made me cry so much, but and so of course it made me cry. But I did watch the movie as well, and this is the funny thing, I think I mentioned this before, there is a movie about the story which I've watched some years ago, not knowing it was the same book. So as I was reading the book, I was like, I've heard this before, I've known about this before. And yes, in fact, it was a movie, and I was able to find it again. So now that I read the book, I think I'm going to rewatch that movie as well. So the next 2 books are what I want to call second chance books, because these are books that I had forever, and for some reason I was never really interested on finish them, but boy was I wrong. The first book is The Perfect Son, and this is by Lorenzo, and so this book I started a long time ago, like probably in July or something like that, but I never actually finished the book because it was such a slow pace book at the beginning that I always kind of had it in between books, and for some reason it just kind of got left behind. And so now that I finally was able to go back to that book, oh my goodness, it is so interesting. So on this book, we're following this lady called Tessie, and so she had lost her husband on a tragic accident. There was a plane crash and her husband died, and so she was left behind with her son, and soon after that her son disappears. And so now she's kind of going back in time, trying to remember every day after her husband passed and had that accident, and how, you know, she was taking care of her son, and at what point he disappeared. And so the ending definitely blew my mind. I did not see what happened coming at all. And so that is one that I highly recommend. The second book that I finished is Malice, and this is by Heather Walters. So as I mentioned before, I started reading this book. I was 20% in, and then I kind of lost interest. I wasn't really following the story. So I decided to give this book a second chance. I went ahead and started over from scratch, and I loved it. So this is a retelling of Sleeping Beauty. And so on this book, Sleeping Beauty is kind of looking for ways to break her curse without having to fall in love and give her kingdom to some random prince, because she wants to rule and she doesn't want to just become a wife. And she has seen time and time before from generations that, you know, previously, yes, the prince have broken the curse, but the woman haven't actually lived happy because she always had to follow the man lead and let the man rule. And so I really like that part of the spin-off, of course. And then we have Malice, who becomes friends with Sleeping Beauty, and she was actually working for her dad, the king, because on her veins she has this venom that he was using to his advantage to kill, you know, everybody who got on his way. But she becomes really good friends with Sleeping Beauty, and she wants to help her break the curse. And so she's doing everything on her power to help her. And at the same time, she's learning about her own background, how she wasn't born cursed, but she's discovering her powers. And she's learning that her powers doesn't have to be used for evil. I'm really glad that I gave this book a second chance. And this is book 1 of a duology. And of course, it ended on a cliffhanger. So now I can't wait for the second book on the series. Next book that I finished is The Jane Austen Society, and this is by Natalie Jenner. So on this book, we are following different people. This book had like 8 or 10 different characters, which made it a little bit confusing, but they all have a story, and they're all kind of united for their love of the Jane Austen novels. And you can see how their novels have kind of helped each one of them on their different life struggles. So what I love about the book is that it talks a lot about grief. So there has a lot of beautiful quotes. There's one that I never highlight on my books, but I definitely had to for this book, because there were so many beautiful quotes, and I wanted to share this one with you. It says, "No one can, sadly, no one else can ever understand your loss. It belongs to you. It impacts only you, and guess what? They don't need to understand, but you do. You need to fully appreciate how this has changed you so you can indeed move on and live, but as a changed person." Because grief changes. I mean, unfortunately, unstoppably, and when we're going through grief, we are, you know, going through changes, and we will never be the same person that we were before we had experienced some sort of like grief. And I just appreciated those quotes so much. I love the book. It is a really slow read. So if you watch one of my vlogs that when I was reading these, I think I talked about that a little bit, but of course, so worth the read. So beautiful. And I love seeing how the different characters on the Jane Austen novels can relate to the, you know, the characters on this book and what they learn from them. So it was beautiful to see, even though if I haven't read all the Jane Austen novels, now I really want to after reading this book. Another one that I was so happy to finish, I love this book so much, is The Paper Palace. This is by Miranda Colley Heller. And so on this book, we're following the story of this family, or this lady who was used to always going to spend summer at this lake house, which was built by her grandpa for her grandmother, and the house is called the Paper Palace. Every summer she goes back to kind of relive her childhood memories, and now she's bringing her own family there. But even though she had a lot of beautiful amazing times on this lake house, she also had some very sad memories. There's also a lot of loss, a lot of sorrow, and there is a secret that she has been keeping, and you get to discover. But this book had made me cry and also made me laugh, and there's some steamy scenes on this book as well, just a little bit, not too much. It just kind of takes you to like emotions, like if you are reading about somebody's lives and you can see all the different layers of emotions, you can find that on this book, and I loved it so much. Next book that I finished is I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings, and this is by Maya Angelou. And so this was such a beautiful, powerful read. This book was so emotional and so many, like, it just touched my heart so much, so many stories that it's just unbelievable, the things that happened to her. But also, if you really compare in times, these are things that are happening now. And so we're following the story of Maya since she was a little girl until she finally found her voice. And so she had been abused multiple times by different people, by different men in her life, and since she was really little, she didn't know what that was. She just was this lonely girl who all she wanted was a little bit of affection and friendships. So she was taken advantage of by her stepfather, also by some of her friends at school, the way they play. She didn't know that was abuse. It's just such an emotional read. So a lot of trigger warnings if you want to read this book, but it was one that I think was definitely worth the read. So the next book that I finished is Unbound, and this is by Tarana Burke. And so this is the book of her story about creating the Me Too movement. A little bit similar to Maya, she was also abused from a very early age, and she didn't even know that was abuse. That's typically what the case is. And then as she grew, she knew she didn't want that for her daughter. And I think for me, it was really painful to read the part where she, she realizes she is pregnant and she's having a daughter. And then her world just changed because she was so afraid of, going back to the same cycle. And again, another very emotional read. So after she finally found her voice, she created a Me Too movement. But you can see even within herself, right now she is this very empowering woman, but you can read about her struggles and what actually caused her to finally step up to not just the world, but to herself, and to be open about what happened to her. And so she touches a lot of issues that are happening now. For example, even starting the Me Too movement, a lot of people started to come forward, like actresses, a lot of different people. But unfortunately, a lot of people in the Black communities still don't get taken as seriously, because it is almost expected that they're gonna go through some sort of abuse, and that's just really sad. And yeah, so a lot of different things on this book that are very eye-opening, that again, highly recommend. So the next book that I finished is The Help. This is by Catherine Stockett. And so on this book, we're following the story of this group of maids that are working on white houses on the times of segregation in Mississippi. And so there's of course a movie about it, which I absolutely loved, but the book just gave me so much more. So even if you have watched the movie, I recommend you read the book, because now you get one thing that the movie is always missing is how the characters are thinking, like when you can hear, like what goes through their mind before they even speak. Sometimes you don't see that on the movie itself. On the book, you're following the story of the maids, and then also the story of Skeeter, who is one of the daughters who went to college, came back, and when she comes back from college, her nanny, who was this Black woman who raised her, was no longer there, and nobody could could tell her where she was and why she left town. And so she started this investigation with the other maids around, and then she decided to write a book. So she had recently graduated as a journalist, and she wanted to give these maids a voice and write a book about their experiences on white families, of course, on times of segregation. So such an amazing book. The movie is also amazing, but highly suggest you read the book as well. And the next book that I finished is Negra, Esclava y Religiosa. So like I said, I've been trying to read more Spanish books, and this was such an amazing beginning because I've learned so much. So the author is Samira Aguilar, who is this Black Peruvian lady, and she really went above and beyond with her research. And so this is a research document, and she signed this for me, so she's so amazing. All the research, how, you know, like that she did to be able to put this book. And this book is quite short, but it has so much in it. So what I love is that when you read it, you feel like she's sitting next to you telling you all these stories. So it makes it so relatable, and it doesn't feel like a history book, although having so much history. So it talks about the history of how, you know, when the Spanish people came and conquered, how they brought in like a percentage of slaves to basically you know, like half, and then also a percentage of women slaves to populate slavery on when they were conquering these places like Peru, like everywhere on South America. And it also talks about how slavery was in relationship to like the church, and particularly on convents, how each one of like the nuns will have their own like slave, which I know it's so weird to think about it now, but when I went to Peru, this last trip that I took in December, I went to Arequipa, and I was able to visit a convent, which is now a museum, and you can see where the nuns used to live, and each one has this little cabin, like this little house, and on the second floor there was the area where they each had their own slave who cooked for them, and it's so interesting to see. I know I recorded all of that, but I never actually posted that video, so maybe I'll go ahead and edit that video because it was so interesting. And now by reading this book, I feel like I can now see, you know, like learn more about how that was happening, because in the museum they just briefly talk about it, and I feel like I learned so much on this book. Anyway, I know this book is really hard to find here, but if you're in Peru, you can probably find it, and I highly recommend it. And then I'm going to mention two books that I am in the process of. I didn't quite finish these books, but I'm going to continue to the month of March. So one is The Black Kids, and this is by Christina Hammonds Reed. I finally got the audiobook, so I was just waiting for that. And so on this book, we're following the story of these African-American kids on the 90s. And I don't know a lot more about this book other than it's based on LA. And so you get to see, obviously, all their life struggles, which I'm pretty sure they're still present today. So I am very excited to get to this book. And the other one is Emma by Jane Austen. I started reading this book. It was such a beautiful, relaxing time. I'm probably about 75% done with it, but not quite fully yet there. So I'll talk about this on my wrap up for March. And so yeah, so those are all the books that I was able to read this month. Please let me know which books did you read. If you read one book or two, you know, anything counts. And so now I'm going to go ahead and announce the winner for this book. So congratulations to my winner. Make sure you send me an email. I'm going to have my email on the description box. And make sure you also leave a comment to be able to win in this book, which I'm going to probably announce the winner on my next wrap up. So I want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.